November 3rd, 2019, Amarillo, Texas. 3:47 a.m. The emergency dispatch center in Amarillo was unusually quiet for a Sunday morning. Officer Patricia Mendez had just poured her fourth cup of coffee when the phone system lit up with an incoming call. She pressed the blinking button and adjusted her headset. 911, what's your emergency? Heavy breathing filled the line. Then silence. Patricia leaned forward, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to trace the call. Hello? This is 911. Can you hear me? A male voice finally broke through, trembling and barely coherent. She's not breathing. I think she's dead. Patricia's training kicked in immediately. Her voice remained calm and measured. Sir, I need you to tell me your location. Where are you right now? I'm at home, 4712 Canyon Drive. Please, you have to understand. It wasn't me. It was something inside her. The address appeared on Patricia's screen as the system automatically traced the call. She gestured urgently to her supervisor, Tom Richardson, who was reviewing reports at a nearby desk. He immediately moved to her side, listening through a secondary headset. Sir, I'm sending help right now. Is there anyone else in the house with you? No, just her body, but she's not in there anymore. The demon left when she stopped moving. Patricia exchanged a glance with Tom, whose expression had shifted from routine concern to something far more serious. He reached for the radio to dispatch units while Patricia kept the caller on the line. What's your name, sir? Marcus Dalton. But you need to understand what happened here. This wasn't murder. This was necessary. She was dangerous. The things she was saying, the way she looked at me. Patricia could hear sirens beginning to wail in the background of the call, growing louder. The response time was impressive, less than 4 minutes. Marcus must have heard them too because his breathing accelerated. They're coming. They're going to think I'm crazy. They won't understand. Marcus, I need you to do exactly as the officers tell you when they arrive. Put down anything you're holding and keep your hands visible. Can you do that for me? The line went dead. 47112 Canyon Drive, 3:52 a.m. Officers. Jake Morrison and his partner, rookie officer Sarah Chen, were the first to arrive at the single-story ranch house. The neighborhood was modest, working class, with neat lawns and weathered pickup trucks in most driveways. Number 4712 stood out only because every light in the house was blazing, and the front door hung partially open. Jake radioed their arrival while Sarah checked her weapon, her hand steady despite this being only her 3rd month on patrol. They'd both heard the dispatch details: possible homicide, caller claiming demonic possession, mental state questionable. Stay sharp, Jake muttered as they approached the entrance, their flashlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. We don't know what we're walking into. The smell hit them before they crossed the threshold. Copper and something fouler. Sarah's stomach lurched, but she kept her composure. Through the open door, they could see into the living room. A man sat motionless on the couch, his clothes soaked in blood, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Amarillo Police. Marcus Dalton, I need you to stand up slowly and show me your hands. Marcus looked up, and Sarah felt a chill despite her training. His eyes were hollow, distant, like he was looking through them rather than at them. He stood mechanically, raising his blood-stained hands into the air. She's in the bedroom, he said flatly. I tried to save her soul. I had no choice. Jake moved forward with handcuffs while Sarah maintained her position, weapon drawn but lowered. As Jake secured Marcus, Sarah's flashlight beam swept the hallway leading to the back of the house. The bedroom door was closed, but a dark stain had seeped under it, spreading across the hardwood floor. We need backup and medical, Jake said into his radio, though his tone suggested it was far too late for the latter. Suspect in custody. Possible victim in the residence. Within minutes, the quiet street transformed into a chaos of flashing lights. More patrol cars arrived, followed by an ambulance and Detective Robert Hayes, a 20-year veteran who'd been called from home. He arrived in jeans and a hastily thrown-on department jacket, his gray hair disheveled. Hayes approached Jake, who was placing Marcus into the back of a patrol car. The suspect hadn't resisted, hadn't said another word. He simply stared ahead with that same vacant expression. "What do we have?" Hayes asked. "Caller admits to killing his girlfriend, claims she was possessed. He's been compliant, but there's something off about him, Detective. He's not showing any normal emotional response." Hayes nodded grimly. He'd seen this before, though not often. Sometimes shock manifested as eerie calm. Sometimes it was drugs. Sometimes it was genuine mental breakdown. And sometimes it was cold calculation wrapped in a convenient excuse. "The victim? Haven't confirmed yet. The bedroom is secured, waiting for you and forensics." Hayes pulled on latex gloves and entered the house. The living room showed signs of a struggle: a broken lamp, scattered magazines, a overturned coffee table. But it was the bedroom that would reveal the true horror of what had happened here. He pushed open the door carefully, his decades of experience preparing him for the worst. Even so, his breath caught in his throat. The woman lay on the bed, her body positioned almost ceremonially. She was young, perhaps late 20s, with dark hair matted with blood. Her face was bruised beyond recognition, eyes half open and glazed. Around her, arranged in a crude circle, were religious items: a battered Bible, a wooden cross, several candles that had burned down to stubs. But it was the injuries that told the real story. This hadn't been a quick death. The medical examiner would later confirm what Hayes suspected immediately. She had been beaten repeatedly over an extended period. This was torture, prolonged and deliberate, dressed up in the trappings of religious ritual. Detective Hayes pulled out his phone and began documenting the scene, knowing that these images would be crucial in court. As he photographed the victim and the surrounding area, he noticed something else: scratches on the walls, deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. Her fingernails. She had fought. She had tried to escape. Whatever Marcus Dalton would claim about demons and possession, the evidence told a different, far more human story of domestic violence taken to its most horrific extreme. Outside, as dawn began to break over Amarillo, Marcus sat in the back of the patrol car, still silent, still staring. Sarah Chen watched him through the window, trying to reconcile the ordinary-looking man with the nightmare scene inside that house. "First homicide?" Jake asked, appearing beside her. "Yeah. It doesn't get easier. But remember, whatever he claims, whatever excuse he tries to use, that woman in there deserved better. She deserved to live. That's why we do this job." Sarah nodded, turning away from Marcus and focusing on the growing activity around the crime scene. Forensic technicians were arriving, setting up lights and beginning their meticulous work. The medical examiner's van pulled up. Neighbors had started emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Detective Hayes exited the house and walked directly to the patrol car. He opened the door and crouched down to Marcus's level. "Marcus Dalton, I'm Detective Robert Hayes. I need to inform you that you're under arrest for the murder of..." He paused. What was her name? For the first time since his arrest, emotion flickered across Marcus's face. His eyes welled with tears. Vanessa Cruz. She was 28. We'd been together for 3 years. His voice cracked. "I loved her, but she wasn't herself anymore. You have to believe me. Something was inside her, controlling her, making her do terrible things." Hayes maintained his neutral expression. He'd heard countless confessions, justifications, and lies over his career, but something about this case already felt different. The way Marcus spoke, the conviction in his voice, the genuine anguish mixed with his claims of demonic influence, it suggested layers that would need careful unraveling. "We'll talk more at the station," Hayes said. "But I want you to understand something clearly. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." As Hayes read Marcus his Miranda rights, the sun finally crested the horizon, casting long shadows across Canyon Drive. Inside 4712, forensic photographer Amanda Cross was documenting every inch of the bedroom, building a visual record that would help reconstruct the final hours of Vanessa Cruz's life. What she was uncovering suggested this was no sudden act of violence, no momentary loss of control. This was systematic. This was planned. And the religious paraphernalia scattered around the scene wasn't evidence of demonic possession. It was evidence of something far more sinister hiding behind the mask of faith. The investigation into what really happened to Vanessa Cruz was only beginning. But already one thing was becoming clear. The truth would be far more disturbing than any supernatural explanation Marcus Dalton could offer. Amarillo Police Department, November 3, 2019, 9:15 a.m. Detective Robert Hayes sat across from Marcus Dalton in interview room 3, a windowless space designed to be uncomfortable. The walls were painted a dull beige, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and a mounted camera in the corner recorded everything. Marcus's attorney, a public defender named Linda Ramirez, sat beside her client, a legal pad open in front of her. Marcus had been processed, photographed, and allowed to clean the blood from his hands. Now, wearing an orange jumpsuit, he looked smaller somehow, diminished. But his eyes still held that distant quality, as if part of him remained trapped in whatever had happened at 4712 Canyon Drive. Hayes placed a folder on the table and opened it slowly, deliberately. Inside were preliminary crime scene photos. He positioned one where Marcus could see it, Vanessa's face, bruised and lifeless. "Tell me about Vanessa," Hayes began, his voice neutral. "How did you two meet?" Marcus stared at the photo for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost nostalgic. "At a community center. 3 years ago. She was volunteering at a food drive, and I was there picking up donations for my church group. She had this smile. God, she could light up a room." "What church did you attend?" "I didn't go to a regular church anymore. I studied at home mostly. Online sermons, Bible study groups on forums. Vanessa used to tease me about it. Said I was becoming too isolated." Linda Ramirez placed a hand on Marcus's arm. "Detective, my client has agreed to speak with you, but I want to make it clear that he's cooperating voluntarily. If at any point..." "I understand, counselor." Hayes kept his eyes on Marcus. "So you studied religion independently. When did you start believing Vanessa was, what did you call it, possessed?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "About 6 months ago, maybe longer. It happened gradually. At first, I thought she was just stressed from work. She was a nurse at Northwest Texas Hospital, worked long shifts. But then the changes became more obvious." "What kind of changes?" "She'd say things she'd never say. Cruel things. She told me my faith was a joke, that I was weak. She'd laugh at me when I prayed." Marcus leaned forward, his intensity building. "But it was more than words, detective. Her voice would change. Deeper, harsher, and her eyes. Sometimes I'd look at her and it wasn't Vanessa looking back." Hayes had heard similar stories before, usually from defendants trying to establish an insanity defense. But he needed Marcus to keep talking, to reveal the timeline of abuse that the evidence suggested. "Did you seek help? Take her to a doctor?" "I tried. She refused. She'd become violent when I suggested it. She threw things, broke dishes. Once she grabbed a kitchen knife and threatened me with it." Marcus's hands trembled as he spoke. "I knew it wasn't really her doing those things. Something else had taken control. So, instead of calling the police or getting medical intervention, you decided to perform what? An exorcism?" Linda interjected again. "Detective, you're leading the witness." Hayes nodded acknowledgement but continued. "Marcus, the medical examiner's preliminary report indicates Vanessa sustained injuries over an extended period. Broken ribs that had started to heal. Old bruises in various stages. This wasn't a single incident, this was ongoing violence." "I was trying to drive it out," Marcus said, his voice rising. "Don't you understand? I was trying to save her. Every time I thought it was working, the demon would come back stronger. It would make her fight me, hurt herself. I had to restrain her. You had to beat her? Hayes's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. You broke her ribs. You fractured her skull. You struck her repeatedly until she stopped breathing. That's not an exorcism, Marcus. That's murder. Marcus's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. I didn't want her to die. I wanted to save her soul. Why won't anyone believe me? Hayes closed the folder. Because the evidence tells a different story. Your neighbors reported hearing screaming from your house multiple times over the past few months. Vanessa called in sick to work 17 times in the last 3 months. Her supervisor was about to put her on disciplinary review. And according to her phone records, she tried to call her sister 4 times in the week before her death. But she never completed those calls. Why do you think that was? The demon wouldn't let her. It isolated her, made her push everyone away. Or you did, Hayes countered. You isolated her. You cut her off from her support system. You controlled when she could leave the house, who she could talk to. This is a textbook case of domestic abuse escalating to homicide. Linda raised her hand. Detective Hayes, I think we need a break. I need to consult with my client privately. Hayes stood. Take all the time you need. But Ms. Ramirez, you should know. We're charging your client with first-degree murder. The district attorney is confident we can prove premeditation. Northwest Texas Hospital, 11:30 a.m. Detective Hayes and his partner, Detective Maria Gonzalez, sat in the hospital administrator's office with Vanessa Cruz's supervisor, head nurse Patricia Coleman. Patricia was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes were red from crying. Vanessa was one of our best nurses, Patricia said, clutching a tissue. Compassionate, skilled, always willing to take extra shifts. But about 6 months ago, everything changed. How so? Maria asked, her notebook open. She started calling in sick frequently. When she did come in, she wore long sleeves even on hot days. Heavy makeup. She was jumpy, anxious. I pulled her aside once, asked if everything was okay at home. Patricia's voice broke. She said everything was fine, that she was just dealing with some personal stress. Hayes leaned forward. Did she ever mention Marcus Dalton? Any concerns about her relationship? Only once. It was about 2 months ago. We were in the break room and she got a text message. Her whole body tensed up. I asked who it was and she said it was Marcus checking on her. The way she said it. There was fear in her voice. I told her if she ever needed help, she could come to me. She thanked me but never brought it up again. Did you notice any physical injuries? Patricia nodded slowly. Bruises on her arms. Once, I saw fingerprints on her wrist like someone had grabbed her hard. When I asked about it, she said she'd bumped into a door. But I've been a nurse for 30 years, Detective. I know the difference between an accident and abuse. Maria made notes. Why didn't you report it? I should have, God, I should have. Patricia wiped her eyes. But Vanessa was an adult. She denied anything was wrong. I convinced myself I was overreacting, that maybe she really was just clumsy. I didn't want to overstep. And now she's dead because I didn't do enough. Hayes's expression softened slightly. Ms. Coleman, this isn't your fault. Marcus Dalton made the choice to hurt Vanessa. Multiple times. That responsibility lies with him alone. After leaving the hospital, the detectives drove to interview Vanessa's sister, Elena Cruz, who lived 40 minutes away in Canyon. Elena met them at her door, her face swollen from crying. She was younger than Vanessa, probably mid-20s, with the same dark hair and delicate features. Please come in, she said quietly, leading them to a small living room cluttered with children's toys. My kids are at my mother's house. I couldn't have them here right now. They sat on a worn sofa while Elena curled into an armchair, hugging a pillow to her chest. When was the last time you spoke with Vanessa? Maria asked gently. About 3 weeks ago. She called me late at night crying. She said Marcus was becoming paranoid, accusing her of things that made no sense. He was reading all these religious texts, watching videos online about demons and possession. She said he'd been looking at her differently, like he didn't recognize her. What did you tell her? I begged her to leave him. I offered to drive out there that night and bring her back here, but she said it would only make things worse, that Marcus would calm down. Elena's voice hardened. She said she still loved him, that he was just going through something difficult. She actually defended him. Hayes pulled out his phone and showed Elena a photo of Marcus from his booking. Had you met him before? A few times, early in their relationship. He seemed nice enough then. Quiet, religious, but not in a scary way. He was attentive to Vanessa, brought her flowers, cooked dinner for her. My sister seemed happy. Elena stared at the photo. I don't understand how someone changes like that. How someone who claims to love you can. She couldn't finish the sentence. Maria handed her a box of tissues. Elena, did Vanessa ever mention Marcus talking about demons or exorcisms? Yes, in that last phone call. She said he'd been accusing her of being infected with evil. He started performing these bizarre rituals, making her read Bible passages for hours, refusing to let her sleep because he said the demon was strongest when she was unconscious. She was terrified, but she was also embarrassed. She didn't want people to know what was happening. Hayes exchanged a glance with Maria. The picture was becoming clearer. Marcus had likely been experiencing a mental health crisis, possibly exacerbated by his immersion in extreme religious content online. His paranoia had fixated on Vanessa, and he'd rationalized his abuse as spiritual warfare. Did you try to contact her after that call? Elena nodded miserably. I called her every day for a week. She never answered. I texted her, begged her to respond. Finally, Marcus called me from her phone. He said Vanessa was fine but needed space. He said I was a corrupting influence and that I shouldn't contact her anymore. Then he blocked my number. Did you report this to anyone? I called the police in Amarillo. They said they'd do a welfare check, but when officers went to the house, Vanessa answered the door and said everything was fine. She told them Marcus and I had a disagreement and that I was overreacting. Elena's face twisted in anguish. She covered for him. Even then, she protected him. It was a pattern Hayes had seen too many times. Victims of domestic abuse often defended their abusers, trapped by a combination of fear, love, and psychological manipulation. Vanessa had been isolated, controlled, and gradually worn down until she couldn't see a way out. As they prepared to leave, Elena grabbed Hayes' arm. Detective, please promise me something. Don't let him use that demon story to escape justice. My sister died terrified and in pain because of him, not because of anything supernatural. Because of him. I promise, Hayes said. Whatever Marcus Dalton believes or claims to believe, he'll be held accountable for what he did. Amarillo Police Department, 4:00 p.m. Back at the station, Hayes and Maria compiled their findings. The forensic reports were coming in, each one more damning than the last. The medical examiner had confirmed that Vanessa had sustained at least 30 distinct injuries over a period of weeks. Some were defensive wounds, indicating she'd tried to protect herself. Others were inflicted while she was likely restrained. The toxicology report showed no drugs or alcohol in her system. She had been completely sober and aware during her ordeal. Hayes reviewed the crime scene photos again, focusing on the religious items arranged around Vanessa's body. There was something performative about it, something that suggested Marcus had been convinced he was doing something righteous. That conviction would make him dangerous in court, a defendant who genuinely believed his own delusions could be compelling to a jury. We need to build an airtight case, Maria said, reading his thoughts. The defense will push for diminished capacity, maybe insanity. They'll bring in psychiatrists who will testify that Marcus was experiencing a psychotic break. Then we counter with our own experts, Hayes replied. We show the premeditation, the pattern of abuse, the fact that he knew what he was doing was wrong. He just convinced himself it was necessary. His phone buzzed. A text from the district attorney's office. They wanted a meeting first thing Monday morning to discuss trial strategy. This case was going to be high profile, the kind that attracted media attention and public scrutiny. Hayes thought about Vanessa Cruz, about the life she'd had before Marcus Dalton's paranoia had consumed her. She'd been a nurse, someone who dedicated her life to helping others. She'd had a family who loved her, a career she was good at, a future that had been stolen by violence dressed up as faith. Whatever happened in the courtroom, Hayes was determined to make sure that truth prevailed over Marcus's delusions. Vanessa deserved that much. She deserved justice. Amarillo Police Department, November 4, 2019, 8:00 a.m. Detective Maria Gonzalez sat in front of 3 computer monitors in the department's digital forensics lab, her eyes scanning through the contents of Marcus Dalton's seized laptop and phone. Beside her, tech analyst Kevin Park worked methodically through encrypted files and browser histories, building a timeline of Marcus's descent into dangerous obsession. "You need to see this," Kevin said, pulling up a folder labeled Spiritual Warfare. He's been documenting everything for months. The folder contained hundreds of files, journal entries, screenshots of online forums, downloaded videos about demonic possession, and photographs. Maria felt her stomach turn as she opened the photo subfolder. Images of Vanessa appeared chronologically, starting from 6 months ago. In the early photos, she looked normal, smiling at the camera during what appeared to be a dinner date. But as the dates progressed, the images became disturbing. Vanessa's face showed increasing signs of distress, bruises, exhaustion. In several photos, her eyes were squeezed shut as if in pain, and her hands were visible in frame, tied with rope. The captions beneath each photo made Maria's blood run cold. Day 12. The demon resists. Vanessa's body grows weaker, but the entity remains strong. Day 31. Breakthrough during prayer session. The demon spoke through her, cursing God. Proof of possession confirmed. Day 67. Physical restraint necessary. The demon uses her body to attack me. I must protect myself while saving her soul. Kevin pulled up Marcus's browser history. He spent an average of 8 to 10 hours per day on these religious extremist forums. Look at the threads he was active in. Maria leaned closer. The forum was called Soldiers of Light, a fringe online community dedicated to discussing spiritual warfare, exorcism, and demonic influence in modern society. Marcus's username was Faithful Sentry, and his post history revealed a man spiraling deeper into paranoia. One thread from 4 months ago caught her attention. Faithful Sentry. My girlfriend has changed. She says things she never would have said before. She's angry all the time, hostile toward my faith. Could this be demonic influence? Holy Warrior 88. Absolutely. Demons target those closest to believers to weaken our resolve. You need to act fast before the possession becomes complete. Truthseeker 2019. Have you tried binding prayers? Sometimes physical restraint during prayer can help expel the demon. Don't let secular authorities interfere. They don't understand spiritual matters. The responses grew more extreme as Marcus's posts became more desperate. Forum members encouraged him to isolate Vanessa from corrupting influences, to intensify his spiritual interventions, and to ignore anyone who suggested psychiatric or medical help. Maria scrolled through months of these exchanges, watching as Marcus became increasingly convinced that Vanessa was possessed and that only he could save her. The forum had reinforced his delusions, provided validation, and essentially given him permission to do what he did. This is radicalization, Maria said quietly. No different than terrorist recruitment. These people groomed him into believing violence was necessary. Kevin nodded grimly. There's more. He made several purchases in the weeks before Vanessa's death. He pulled up credit card statements. Religious texts from fringe publishers, restraints marketed as therapeutic, and this is particularly disturbing. He bought a book called The Complete Manual of Spiritual Deliverance. Look at what he highlighted. Kevin opened a PDF scan of the book that Marcus had apparently digitized. Passages were marked throughout, including sections that described physical methods of demon expulsion and warned that the host body may be damaged during the process, but saving the soul is paramount. He built himself an instruction manual for murder, Maria said, her voice tight with anger. and he convinced himself it was holy work. She pulled out her phone and called Detective Hayes. "Robert, you need to get down to the lab. We've got everything we need to prove premeditation and establish motive. This wasn't a psychotic break. This was calculated, and he had help radicalizing." District Attorney's Office, 11:00 a.m. District Attorney James Morrison sat at the head of a conference table, surrounded by his prosecution team. Detective Hayes and Maria Gonzalez presented their findings while Morrison's lead prosecutor, Assistant DA Rebecca Walsh, took detailed notes. "The digital evidence is damning," Rebecca said, reviewing the printed forum exchanges. "But we need to be prepared for the defense strategy. They'll argue diminished capacity, that Marcus genuinely believed he was performing an exorcism and couldn't distinguish right from wrong." Morrison tapped his pen against the table. "That's where the timeline matters. Maria, you said these forum posts spanned 4 months?" "Correct. And they show clear awareness that what he was doing could be perceived as criminal. Look at this post from 3 weeks before Vanessa's death." Maria pulled out a highlighted printout. "Faithful Sentry. I know outsiders would call this abuse. They don't understand that sometimes you have to hurt the vessel to save the soul. If anyone found out, they'd try to stop me. I've removed all contact between Vanessa and her family. The demon was using them to maintain its hold." "That's consciousness of guilt," Rebecca said, her eyes lighting up. "He knew what he was doing was wrong in the eyes of society. He took steps to conceal it. That undermines any insanity defense." Hayes spread out the medical examiner's report. "The physical evidence supports prolonged torture. Vanessa had injuries in various stages of healing, broken bones that had started to knit back together, bruises from weeks old to days old. The fatal injuries occurred in the hours before death, but this was the culmination of a sustained campaign of violence." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Here's what concerns me. A jury might sympathize with a man who genuinely believed his girlfriend was possessed, especially in Texas, where religious beliefs run deep. We need to humanize Vanessa, show that she was a victim of domestic violence, not demonic possession." "We have witnesses," Maria offered. "Her supervisor, her sister, her co-workers. They all noticed the change in Vanessa, saw the fear, saw the isolation. And we have her attempted phone calls. She tried to reach out for help 4 times in her final week. Marcus intercepted every attempt." Rebecca made a note. "We'll establish the pattern: isolation, control, escalating violence, and finally murder." The religious justification was just that. A justification. Marcus Dalton is a domestic abuser who killed his girlfriend and tried to hide behind faith. Morrison stood, signaling the meeting's end. "We go to trial in 3 months. I want every piece of evidence documented, every witness prepared. This case is going to attract national attention, and I won't have this office looking unprepared. Hayes, Gonzalez, excellent work. Keep digging. I want to know everything about Marcus Dalton's background, his family, his history. If there are any prior incidents of violence, I want them found." Marcus Dalton's childhood home, Lubbock, Texas, 2:00 p.m. The house sat on a quiet street in Lubbock, a modest 2-story structure with peeling paint and an overgrown lawn. Hayes and Maria had driven 90 minutes to speak with Marcus's mother, Dorothy Dalton, hoping to gain insight into his psychological history. Dorothy answered the door after the 3rd knock. She was in her late 60s, thin and frail-looking, with gray hair that hung limply around her face. Her eyes were hollow, already carrying the weight of what her son had done. "Mrs. Dalton, I'm Detective Hayes. This is my partner, Detective Gonzalez. We spoke on the phone." Dorothy nodded wordlessly and stepped aside to let them in. The interior was dark, curtains drawn, the air stale. Religious iconography covered nearly every wall: crosses, paintings of Jesus, framed Bible verses. They sat in a cramped living room while Dorothy perched on the edge of an armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't know what you want me to tell you," she said softly. "Marcus was a good boy. He loved the Lord. He would never hurt anyone." "Mrs. Dalton," Maria began gently, "we're trying to understand what might have led Marcus to believe Vanessa was possessed. Did he show any signs of this kind of thinking before?" Dorothy's eyes drifted to a photograph on the mantel. A young Marcus, perhaps 10 years old, standing stiffly beside a severe-looking man in a suit. That's his father, Gerald. He passed 5 years ago. Heart attack. Dorothy's voice was barely audible. Gerald was a pastor. Not at a regular church. He believed modern churches had been corrupted. He held services in our basement, taught Marcus that the devil was everywhere, always trying to infiltrate our lives. Hayes leaned forward. How did he teach that? Gerald believed in discipline, spiritual discipline. If Marcus misbehaved, Gerald would say it was the devil working through him. He'd make Marcus pray for hours, sometimes all night. He said it was the only way to drive out evil influences. Maria exchanged a glance with Hayes. The pattern was emerging. Marcus had been raised in an environment where religious extremism was normalized, where ordinary human behavior was pathologized as demonic influence. Did your husband ever become violent during these discipline sessions? Dorothy looked away. Gerald did what he thought was necessary. The Bible says to spare the rod is to spoil the child. Marcus learned to be strong, to resist temptation. Mrs. Dalton, Hayes said carefully, did Marcus ever express beliefs about demons or possession when he was younger? Once. Dorothy's voice cracked. When he was 14, he had a girlfriend at school. Sweet girl, I thought, but Gerald said she was leading Marcus away from God. He forbade Marcus from seeing her. Marcus tried to perform what he called a cleansing on her. He cornered her after school and tried to pray over her, wouldn't let her leave. The girl's parents called the police. Gerald convinced them not to press charges, said it was a misunderstanding. Maria wrote quickly. Was Marcus ever evaluated by a mental health professional? Gerald didn't believe in psychiatry. He said it was Satan's way of explaining away sin. When Marcus had episodes, times when he'd become obsessed with the idea that people around him were evil, Gerald would just intensify the prayer sessions. Hayes felt a deep sadness settling over him. Marcus Dalton had been damaged long before he met Vanessa Cruz. He'd been raised in an environment of religious abuse, taught that violence in the name of faith was acceptable, even necessary. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained the warped worldview that had made it possible. Mrs. Dalton, would you be willing to testify about Marcus's upbringing if this goes to trial? Dorothy's face crumpled. Will it help him? It will help us understand him, Maria said diplomatically. And understanding is the first step toward justice for everyone involved. After they left, Hayes and Maria sat in the car for a long moment, processing what they'd learned. That poor kid never had a chance, Maria said finally. Raised by a fanatic, taught that his own thoughts and feelings were demonic. No wonder he projected that onto Vanessa. It's tragic, Hayes agreed. But tragedy doesn't erase responsibility. Marcus Dalton had opportunities to get help, to walk away, to choose differently. He chose violence. He chose to listen to those forum voices instead of Vanessa's sister, instead of reality. Maria started the engine. The defense will use his background to argue diminished capacity, and will counter with the evidence that he knew right from wrong. He hid what he was doing. He isolated Vanessa specifically so no one could stop him. That's not insanity. That's calculation. As they drove back toward Amarillo, the sun beginning to set over the flat Texas landscape, both detectives understood that the trial ahead would be complex and emotionally draining, but they also knew that the evidence was on their side. Marcus Dalton's digital trail had revealed a man who planned, who prepared, and who ultimately chose to kill the woman he claimed to love. The story he told himself that he was a spiritual warrior saving a soul was nothing more than a delusion he'd weaponized to justify murder. And no amount of religious rhetoric would change what the evidence proved. Vanessa Cruz had died because Marcus Dalton had beaten her to death, slowly and deliberately, while convincing himself he was doing God's work. The truth was far simpler and far more brutal. This was domestic violence in its most extreme form, dressed up in the language of faith to make the perpetrator feel righteous about his crimes. Amarillo, Texas, January 15, 2020. Potter County Courthouse. The trial of Marcus Dalton began on a cold January morning, 73 days after Vanessa Cruz's death. The courthouse steps were crowded with news crews, their cameras capturing every angle as potential jurors filed past. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Vanessa's family sat on one side, Marcus's elderly mother on the other, separated by an aisle that felt wider than its physical distance. District Attorney James Morrison stood at the prosecution table, reviewing his notes one final time. Beside him, Rebecca Walsh organized exhibits, crime scene photos, medical reports, printouts of forum posts. Across the aisle, Linda Ramirez conferred quietly with Marcus, who sat motionless in a gray suit, his hands folded on the table. Judge Catherine Brennan entered, and everyone rose. She was a veteran of the bench, known for running a tight courtroom and having little patience for theatrics. After settling into her chair and calling the court to order, she addressed the packed gallery. "This is a murder trial, not a spectacle. I expect decorum from everyone present. Any outburst will result in removal." Her gaze swept the room. "Let's proceed with opening statements." Morrison approached the jury box, making eye contact with each of the 12 jurors, 6 men, 6 women, ranging from a young construction worker to a retired schoolteacher. He'd fought hard during voir dire to seat jurors who could separate religious belief from criminal responsibility. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a simple truth. Marcus Dalton murdered Vanessa Cruz. He beat her repeatedly over a period of months. He isolated her from her family and friends. He restrained her, tortured her, and ultimately killed her. The evidence will show this beyond any reasonable doubt." Morrison paused, letting his words settle. "The defense will try to confuse you with talk of demons and possession. They'll present Marcus as a man who genuinely believed he was saving a soul. But belief doesn't erase murder. Conviction doesn't justify violence. Marcus Dalton knew what he was doing was wrong. He hid it from the world. He prevented Vanessa from seeking help. And when she finally stopped breathing, he called 911 and tried to craft a story that would excuse his crimes." Morrison returned to his table. Linda Ramirez stood approaching the jury with a softer demeanor. "My client doesn't deny that Vanessa Cruz is dead. He doesn't deny that he was involved in her death. But Marcus Dalton is not a murderer. He's a deeply troubled man who was raised in an environment of religious extremism, who genuinely believed he was engaged in spiritual warfare. The evidence will show that Marcus loved Vanessa, that he was desperate to help her, and that his actions, while tragic and misguided, came from a place of delusional belief rather than criminal intent. We'll present expert testimony demonstrating that Marcus was experiencing a severe mental health crisis, that he couldn't distinguish his religious delusions from reality. This is not murder. This is a tragedy born from untreated mental illness." As Ramirez sat down, Hayes, watching from the gallery, felt his jaw tighten. He'd expected this strategy, but hearing it articulated made his anger flare. Vanessa had been a real person with real dreams, reduced now to a supporting character in Marcus's supposed religious crisis. Day 3 of trial, January 17th, 2020. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over the first week. The medical examiner, Dr. Richard Patterson, took the stand and walked the jury through Vanessa's autopsy report. Using anatomical diagrams and careful language, he described each injury, the fractures, the contusions, the internal bleeding. "Dr. Patterson," Rebecca Walsh asked, "in your professional opinion, were these injuries consistent with a single incident of violence?" "No, absolutely not." Dr. Patterson adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Cruz sustained injuries over an extended period. I documented broken ribs in 3 different stages of healing, indicating they were broken at different times. She had bruising that ranged from fresh to weeks old. This was chronic, sustained trauma. Could these injuries have been self-inflicted? Highly unlikely. The location and pattern of injuries are consistent with being struck by another person. Additionally, several fractures required significant force, far more than someone would use on themselves. What was the cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the head, resulting in a subdural hematoma and brain herniation. In layman's terms, Ms. Cruz was struck in the head with enough force to cause fatal brain bleeding. Walsh displayed photos of Vanessa's body on screens throughout the courtroom. Several jurors looked away. Vanessa's sister, Elena, sitting in the front row, pressed a tissue to her face, her shoulders shaking. "Dr. Patterson, is there any medical evidence that Ms. Cruz was possessed by a demon?" "Objection," Ramirez called. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Brennan said. "Rephrase, Ms. Walsh. Did you find any medical condition that would explain the defendant's claims that Ms. Cruz was exhibiting supernatural behavior?" "No. Toxicology was negative. Brain tissue showed no abnormalities. Ms. Cruz was a healthy 28-year-old woman whose only medical issues were the injuries inflicted upon her." On cross-examination, Ramirez tried to establish that unusual behavior could have prompted Marcus's concerns, but Dr. Patterson remained firm. Nothing in Vanessa's body suggested anything beyond being a victim of assault. Day 7 of trial, January 21st, 2020. Elena Cruz took the stand, her voice steady despite visible emotion. Walsh guided her through her relationship with Vanessa, establishing the closeness between the sisters before Marcus entered the picture. "Tell us about the last phone call you had with your sister." Elena took a deep breath. "It was late at night, about 3 weeks before she died. Vanessa was crying, barely coherent. She said Marcus had become obsessed with the idea that she was evil, that something was wrong with her. He was forcing her to pray for hours, wouldn't let her sleep, accused her of lying whenever she said she was fine." "What did you tell her?" "I begged her to leave. I told her I'd come get her right then, that she could stay with me as long as she needed. But she said," Elena's voice broke, "she said she couldn't leave because Marcus would think the demon was making her run away. She said she had to stay to prove she was still herself." "Did you speak with her again after that?" "No. I tried calling every day. She never answered. Finally, Marcus called from her phone and told me to stop contacting her, that I was making things worse. Then he blocked my number." "Did you try to intervene in any other way?" "Yes. I called the Amarillo Police Department and requested a welfare check. Officers went to the house, but Vanessa answered the door and told them everything was fine. She protected him even then." Elena looked directly at Marcus, her eyes blazing. "She loved you, she trusted you, and you killed her." "Objection." Ramirez stood. "The witnesses." Sustained. "Mrs. Cruz, please direct your answers to the attorney, not the defendant." But the damage was done. Several jurors were now staring at Marcus with unconcealed disgust. Ramirez's cross-examination tried to establish that Vanessa had seemed disturbed or unusual in recent months, suggesting her behavior might have genuinely alarmed Marcus. But Elena held firm. "My sister wasn't disturbed. She was terrified. There's a difference." Day 10 of trial, January 24th, 2020. The prosecution called Dr. Angela Chen, a forensic psychiatrist who had reviewed Marcus's online activity, journal entries, and background. She was a petite woman with sharp eyes and an authoritative presence. "Dr. Chen," Morrison began, "you've reviewed extensive documentation regarding the defendant's mental state. What's your professional opinion?" Marcus Dalton was not experiencing a psychotic break or acute mental illness that prevented him from understanding his actions. What I observed was a pattern of rationalization and justification for abusive behavior, reinforced by an online community that validated his delusions. Can you explain the difference? Someone experiencing genuine psychosis loses touch with reality in fundamental ways. They might hear voices, see things that aren't there, believe impossible things. Marcus Dalton's beliefs, while extreme, were coherent within a religious framework. He understood that others would view his actions as criminal. That's why he isolated Vanessa, why he hid what he was doing. That demonstrates awareness of social and legal norms, which someone in true psychosis wouldn't have. So his religious beliefs don't constitute mental illness? Not in themselves. Millions of people hold strong religious beliefs without becoming violent. Marcus's beliefs became dangerous because they served as justification for control and abuse. This is more consistent with a personality disorder, specifically someone with narcissistic or paranoid traits who used religion to rationalize their behavior. Morrison displayed forum posts on the courtroom screens. These online communities that encouraged Marcus. What role did they play? They functioned as an echo chamber, reinforcing his worst impulses. When someone is prone to paranoid thinking, surrounding themselves with people who validate those fears accelerates the descent. The forum members gave him permission, essentially, to escalate his violence by framing it as spiritual duty. On cross-examination, Ramirez challenged Dr. Chen's conclusions. Dr. Chen, you never personally evaluated my client, correct? That's correct. Mr. Dalton declined to be interviewed by prosecution experts. So your opinion is based entirely on documents and records, not on direct observation. That's standard practice in forensic psychiatry. We often work from records, especially when a defendant chooses not to cooperate. But you can't definitively say what Mr. Dalton was experiencing subjectively, can you? I can say with confidence that his behavior pattern is inconsistent with acute psychosis and more consistent with personality pathology combined with extremist beliefs. Ramirez pressed on. Isn't it possible that someone genuinely believes they're fighting demons and is still mentally ill? Possible, yes, but the evidence here suggests otherwise. Marcus Dalton functioned normally in other areas of his life. He held a job, paid bills, maintained his home. His delusions were specifically focused on Vanessa, which is atypical for psychotic disorders. Day 12 of trial, January 26, 2020. The defense began presenting its case. Their first expert was Dr. Thomas Brenner, a psychiatrist who specialized in religious psychology. He testified that Marcus had been raised in an environment of extreme religious control and that his beliefs about demonic possession were genuine, if misguided. Mr. Dalton sincerely believed he was saving Ms. Cruz's soul, Dr. Brenner explained. His upbringing conditioned him to view the world through a lens of spiritual warfare. When Ms. Cruz began showing signs of stress or illness, Marcus interpreted those signs within his religious framework. So he wasn't capable of understanding that what he was doing was murder? Ramirez asked. In his mind, he wasn't committing murder. He was performing a sacred duty. That distinction matters when we're assessing criminal responsibility. Morrison's cross-examination was sharp. Dr. Brenner, does believing something is right make it legal? Of course not. If someone genuinely believes God told them to rob a bank, does that excuse the robbery? No, but... And if someone believes their spouse is unfaithful and kills them in a jealous rage, does their belief negate the murder? The situations aren't equivalent, aren't they? In each case, someone justifies violence through their personal beliefs. Why should religious delusion be treated differently than any other form of irrational thinking? Dr. Brenner struggled to answer effectively. Morrison pressed his advantage. You testified that Mr. Dalton believed he was saving Ms. Cruz's soul, but the evidence shows he also took steps to hide his actions from others, to prevent Ms. Cruz from contacting her family to avoid detection. Doesn't that demonstrate awareness that society would condemn his behavior? It could also demonstrate fear that secular authorities wouldn't understand the spiritual nature of the situation. Or it could demonstrate consciousness of guilt. Dr. Brenner, in your professional opinion, did Marcus Dalton know that beating someone to death is generally considered wrong? In abstract terms, yes. But in the specific context, yes or no, doctor? Yes, he knew. Morrison sat down, satisfied. The defense's expert had essentially conceded that Marcus understood his actions were wrong, even if he believed they were justified. Day 15 of trial, January 29th, 2020. Marcus took the stand in his own defense, a risky move but one Ramirez felt was necessary. Marcus had insisted on testifying, convinced he could make the jury understand. Dressed in his gray suit, Marcus appeared calm as Ramirez led him through his background, his relationship with Vanessa, the gradual changes he claimed to observe in her behavior. I loved Vanessa more than anything, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. When I saw her changing, becoming someone I didn't recognize, it terrified me. I researched everything I could find about what might be happening. The symptoms matched demonic possession exactly. What symptoms? Personality changes, hostility toward faith, unusual strength during confrontations. The way her voice would change, become deeper and harsher. I know how it sounds, but I saw it with my own eyes. What did you hope to accomplish with the prayer sessions? I wanted to drive out whatever was controlling her. I wanted my Vanessa back. Every time I thought we'd made progress, the demon would return stronger. I had to intensify my efforts. I had to. Marcus's voice broke. I never meant for her to die. I thought I was saving her. But Morrison's cross-examination was devastating. Mr. Dalton, you testified that you loved Vanessa. Is breaking someone's ribs an act of love? I didn't want to hurt her. The demon was using her body. Yes or no, did you break her ribs? Yes, but did you strike her in the face hard enough to fracture her skull? The demon was... Answer the question. Did you strike Vanessa Cruz in the head with sufficient force to kill her? Marcus's composure cracked. Yes, but it wasn't murder. I was trying to save her soul. Morrison let the courtroom absorb Marcus's admission. Then he continued, his voice cold. You isolated her from her family. True. They didn't understand what was happening. You prevented her from going to work, where she might seek help. True. The demon was strongest in public places. You tied her to the bed for days at a time. True. For her own safety. You documented her injuries in photographs with captions about demons. True. Marcus fell silent. Mr. Dalton, you knew that if anyone discovered what you were doing, they would stop you. You knew society would call it abuse, call it torture, call it murder. That's why you hid it. That's why you cut Vanessa off from everyone who loved her. Not because of demons, because you didn't want to be caught. No, Marcus whispered. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a domestic abuser who killed his girlfriend and then tried to use religion to excuse it. No further questions. As Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, his face was ashen. Several jurors wouldn't even look at him. Potter County Courthouse, February 3, 2020, 10:00 a.m. The jury had been deliberating for 18 hours across 2 days. Judge Brennan's courtroom was silent except for the nervous shuffling of feet and the occasional cough. Vanessa's family occupied the front row on the prosecution side. Elena clutched her mother's hand while her father sat rigid, his jaw clenched. Across the aisle, Dorothy Dalton sat alone, her rosary beads moving through her fingers in constant prayer. Detective Hayes stood against the back wall, arms crossed, watching Marcus. The defendant sat motionless beside Linda Ramirez, his face blank. Over the past 3 weeks of trial, Hayes had watched Marcus's demeanor shift from confident conviction to hollow resignation. Whatever Marcus had believed about his righteousness had been systematically dismantled by evidence, testimony, and cross-examination. The bailiff's radio crackled. He listened, then nodded to Judge Brennan. Your Honor, the jury has reached a verdict. A ripple of tension moved through the courtroom. Elena began crying softly. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The jury filed in slowly, their faces carefully neutral. Hayes had learned long ago that trying to read a jury was pointless, but he couldn't help searching their expressions for clues. None of them looked at Marcus. That was usually a bad sign for the defense. Judge Brennan addressed the jury foreman, a middle-aged engineer named Robert Torres. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? We have, Your Honor. Torres handed a folded paper to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Brennan reviewed it silently, her expression unchanging, then returned it to the bailiff. The defendant will rise. Marcus stood, his legs visibly unsteady. Ramirez rose beside him, her hand lightly touching his elbow in support. Mr. Foreman, on the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find? Torres cleared his throat. His voice was firm, unwavering. We find the defendant, Marcus Dalton, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Elena collapsed against her mother, sobbing. Vanessa's father closed his eyes, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or simply relief. Behind them, supporters who'd followed the trial cheered until Judge Brennan's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order! I will have order or I will clear this courtroom." Marcus swayed, his face draining of all color. For a moment, Hayes thought he might collapse. Ramirez gripped his arm more firmly, steadying him. Dorothy Dalton made a sound, half gasp, half wail, but quickly pressed her hand to her mouth, silencing herself. Judge Brennan continued. "The jury, having found the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, sentencing will be scheduled for February 17th. Mr. Dalton, you are remanded to custody without bail pending sentencing. This court is adjourned." As the gavel fell again, 2 deputies moved to Marcus. He didn't resist as they placed him in handcuffs. His eyes found his mother's across the courtroom. Dorothy was crying silently, her rosary still clutched in her weathered hands. "I'm sorry, Mama," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "I tried to do what Daddy taught me. I tried to be righteous." Dorothy couldn't respond. She simply shook her head. Whether in grief or denial, Hayes couldn't tell. Outside the courthouse, 11:15 a.m. District Attorney Morrison held a press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by Rebecca Walsh and Detective Hayes. Cameras flashed continuously as reporters shouted questions. Morrison raised his hand for quiet. Today, justice was served for Vanessa Cruz. The jury saw through the defendant's attempts to hide domestic violence behind claims of religious faith. This verdict sends a clear message. You cannot torture and murder someone and then claim divine justification. A reporter called out, "What sentence will the prosecution seek?" "We will seek the maximum penalty allowed by law, life in prison without possibility of parole." Marcus Dalton showed no mercy to Vanessa Cruz during the months he tortured her. He deserves none in return. Hayes stepped forward when Morrison nodded to him. "I want to acknowledge the courage of Vanessa's family, particularly her sister Elena, who never stopped fighting for justice. I also want to thank the jury for their careful consideration of the evidence. This was not an easy case, but they reached the right conclusion." Later, in a quieter corner of the courthouse plaza, Elena Cruz spoke to a smaller group of reporters, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "My sister was a nurse. She dedicated her life to helping people, to healing them. She deserved so much better than what Marcus Dalton did to her." Elena paused, composing herself. "If there's anything good that can come from this tragedy, I hope it's that other people in abusive relationships will see that there is help available, that you don't have to stay, that no amount of love or faith justifies violence." A reporter asked, "Do you forgive Marcus Dalton?" Elena's expression hardened. "No, and I don't think I ever will. Forgiveness might come someday, but right now, all I feel is relief that he can never hurt anyone else the way he hurt Vanessa." Potter County Jail, 3:00 p.m. Marcus sat in his cell, still wearing the suit from court. His public defender had visited briefly to discuss the sentencing phase, but Marcus had barely listened. The guilty verdict had shattered something fundamental in his worldview. For months, he'd believed he was doing God's work. The forum members had reinforced that belief. His father's teachings had prepared him for spiritual warfare. But now, 12 ordinary people had looked at the same evidence and seen only murder. Had he been wrong? Had the voice he thought was divine guidance been nothing more than his own damaged psyche? The question spiraled through his mind, offering no comfort, no answers. He thought about Vanessa. Not the person he'd convinced himself was possessed, but the real woman he'd met 3 years ago. Her smile, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him when they first started dating, like he was someone worth knowing. When had that changed? When had love turned to control, and control to violence? Marcus didn't have answers. He wasn't sure he wanted them anymore. Potter County Courthouse, February 17, 2020, 9:00 a.m. The sentencing hearing drew a smaller crowd than the verdict, but the courtroom still filled with familiar faces. Vanessa's family occupied their usual seats, dressed in black. Detective Hayes sat beside Maria Gonzalez in the gallery, both present to see the case reach its final conclusion. Judge Brennan entered, and the room rose. Marcus was led in wearing prison orange, his hands cuffed in front of him. He'd lost weight in the 2 weeks since conviction, his face gaunt and hollow. He no longer carried the conviction that had sustained him through the trial. This court is now in session for sentencing in the matter of the state of Texas versus Marcus Dalton. Judge Brennan's voice carried authority accumulated over decades on the bench. Before I impose sentence, the victim's family has requested to make impact statements. Ms. Cruz, you may proceed. Elena walked to the podium, her hands trembling as she unfolded a prepared statement. She looked directly at Marcus, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Marcus, you took my sister from us. You took a woman who dedicated her life to healing others and you destroyed her. You isolated her, you tortured her, and you killed her, all while claiming you loved her. Elena's voice broke, but she continued. Vanessa called me 3 weeks before she died. She was terrified of you. She wanted to leave but was afraid of what you'd do. I should have gone to get her that night. I should have broken down the door if I had to. That guilt will stay with me forever. She paused, wiping her eyes. But your guilt should be greater. You had countless opportunities to stop. Every time you raised your hand to her, every time you tied her down, every time you ignored her pleas, you could have chosen differently. You didn't. And now my mother will never see her daughter again. My father will never walk Vanessa down the aisle. My children will never know their aunt. You didn't just kill Vanessa. You killed the future she should have had. Vanessa's mother spoke next, her words simple but devastating. My daughter was my light. You extinguished that light. I pray you spend every day of the rest of your life remembering what you've done. When they finished, Judge Brennan turned to Marcus. Mr. Dalton, you have the right to address the court before sentencing. Do you wish to do so? Marcus stood slowly. His attorney had advised against speaking, but he'd insisted. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I want to say I'm sorry. I know those words mean nothing now, but I need to say them. I thought I was helping. I thought I was saving her. I was wrong about everything. He looked at Elena. You're right. I had chances to stop. I didn't take them. I convinced myself that what I was doing was righteous, but it was evil. I became the thing I thought I was fighting. Tears ran down his face. I loved Vanessa. I know you don't believe that, and maybe love doesn't mean what I thought it meant. But I did love her, and I destroyed her anyway. I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Judge Brennan's expression remained impassive. Mr. Dalton, this court has reviewed the pre-sentencing report, heard victim impact statements, and considered arguments from both parties. What you did to Vanessa Cruz represents domestic violence at its most extreme. You systematically isolated, controlled, and tortured another human being. Your claims of religious motivation do not mitigate your actions. They make them more disturbing, because you used faith as a weapon. She paused, letting her words resonate. The law provides for sentences that reflect both punishment and protection of society. In this case, both factors demand the maximum penalty. Marcus Dalton, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in the custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The gavel fell with finality. 1 year later, February 2021, Detective Hayes stood at Vanessa Cruz's grave in Llano Cemetery, a bouquet of white lilies in his hand. The headstone was simple. Vanessa Maria Cruz, 1991-2019. Beloved daughter, sister, healer. He placed the flowers at the base and stepped back. Over his career, Hayes had worked hundreds of cases, but some stayed with you. Vanessa's case had exposed the dangerous intersection of mental illness, religious extremism, and domestic violence, a combination that had proven lethal. The trial had attracted national attention. Several advocacy groups had used the case to push for better domestic violence intervention protocols and mental health resources. The Soldiers of Light Forum had been shut down by its hosting service after journalists exposed its role in radicalizing Marcus. Hayes's phone buzzed. A text from Maria. New case just came in. Possible domestic situation. You available? He typed back, on my way. As he walked back to his car, Hayes thought about Elena's words at sentencing, that something good should come from tragedy. He couldn't bring Vanessa back. He couldn't undo the failures that had allowed Marcus to isolate and kill her. But he could keep working, keep fighting for victims who couldn't fight for themselves. Texas State Prison, Amarillo Unit. Marcus Dalton sat in his cell, a Bible open on his lap, but he wasn't reading it. He hadn't really read it in months. The words that had once provided structure and meaning now felt hollow. He'd been placed in protective custody after other inmates learned about his case. Even in prison, there were lines you didn't cross, and killing a woman while claiming God told you to cross all of them. Marcus thought about Vanessa every day, not the distorted version he'd created in his mind during those final months, but the real woman, the nurse who'd volunteered at food drives, who'd laughed at his awkward jokes, who'd seen something worth loving in him. He'd destroyed her, not a demon, not spiritual warfare, just him, his damaged mind, and his refusal to seek real help. In therapy sessions mandated by the prison, Marcus was slowly beginning to understand the depth of his father's abuse and how it had warped his perception of faith and relationships. Understanding didn't erase what he'd done, but it was a start toward accepting responsibility without the comforting delusion of divine purpose. He would die in this cell. That was justice. It was also mercy. Mercy that he hadn't extended to Vanessa. Elena Cruz's home, Canyon, Texas. Elena sat at her kitchen table, reviewing materials for a victim advocacy training program she'd enrolled in. Vanessa's death had left a hole in her life that would never fully heal, but she'd channeled her grief into action. She volunteered at a domestic violence shelter, spoke at high schools about warning signs of abusive relationships, and worked with legislators on bills to improve intervention protocols. It didn't bring Vanessa back, but it honored her memory. On the refrigerator hung a photo of the two sisters, arms around each other, laughing at some long-forgotten joke. Elena looked at it every morning, drawing strength from Vanessa's smile. "I'm still fighting for you," she whispered. "I always will." Outside, life continued. Children played in yards. Cars passed on quiet streets. The world moved forward, carrying the living while the dead remained as memories, warnings, and in the best cases, inspirations for change. Vanessa Cruz had been a healer in life. In death, her story had become a catalyst. Imperfect, painful, but ultimately pushing society to confront uncomfortable truths about violence, mental illness, and the dangerous ways faith could be twisted to justify the unjustifiable. Justice had been served, but the work of prevention, of protecting future victims, of breaking cycles of abuse, that work would never truly end.